What are we covering in the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas War, day 132? The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken stated today that he still believes that a hostage deal is possible. Ahmed Gul, the commander of Hamas's al-Shati refugee camp battalion, was assassinated in an airstrike in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. The IDF launched a major operation into the main hospital in the area, the al-Nasser hospital. Following intelligence, it suggested that bodies of kidnapped hostages were being held in the hospitals. The United States has launched two independent investigations about two incidents in which 17-year-old Palestinian-American citizens were killed by IDF forces in the West Bank. There were continued substantial escalations in the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. Hezbollah launched over 37 rockets and missiles towards the northern parts of Israel in the last 24 hours. Hello everyone, I am Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute Fellow at the University of California, Irvine, here to bring you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas War. It is currently the evening of February 15th, 2024 in the United States, the morning of February 16th, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken stated today that he still believes that a hostage deal is possible, adding that the United States is working very closely with Qatar and Egypt on some very difficult issues in order to try to resolve them and bring the two sides to the negotiating table. In addition to this, after Israel refused to send delegates to the hostage negotiations in Cairo yesterday, the CIA director William Barnes arrived in Israel today. He reportedly met with Netanyahu in order to discuss the hostage deal. The Israeli Prime Minister's office stated that the two discussed Netanyahu's, quote, maximum pressure policy with regards to Hamas, applying military pressure and very firm negotiating tactics in order to bring Hamas back from its demands. Other sources added that Netanyahu stated that he would not accept any humanitarian overtures to the Gaza Strip until Hamas supplies proof that hostages were given the medicines they were supposed to receive in the medical deal back in January. Importantly, it was also reported that after yesterday, Netanyahu made the unilateral decision to not let Israeli delegates go to the negotiations and did not consult the other members of his war cabinet. In meeting today with the CIA director, again, the other members of the war cabinet were not invited. Instead, who attended the meeting was Prime Minister Netanyahu, the head of the Mossad, Dedi Barnea, and the head of Israel's National Security Council, a close ally of Netanyahu, Tzachi Hanegbi. The other members of the war cabinet were not invited to this meeting. Other news related to the hostages, the IDF announced today that another hostage, Yair Yaakov, is confirmed having actually been killed on October 7th and that his body was kidnapped to the Gaza Strip by Hamas. This now makes 32 hostages that the IDF has confirmed that they are dead and their bodies are held by Hamas out of the 134 hostages. According to reports about a week ago, different estimates have suggested that the IDF actually believes that an additional 20 to 30 hostages are also dead. However, this has not been confirmed by the IDF. The official numbers are that out of the 134 hostages, 32 are confirmed dead. Finally, in an interview given today, one of the hostages who were released in the previous humanitarian truce in November stated that during her kidnapping on October 7th, another hostage that was with her was killed right next to her while the IDF helicopter was firing on their car as it was making its way towards Gaza. This comes amidst another report that that same hostage, whose body is still held by Hamas, was killed by IDF fire. There are several reports that the IDF was trying to stop cars as they were going back to the Gaza Strip. It is unclear if the IDF knew that hostages were in those cars or vehicles, or if they didn't. However, this is testimony that was given. The IDF stated that it is still investigating what exactly happened in that incident and cannot supply information at this time. Moving on to the fighting in the Gaza Strip, there were no rockets or mortars sent from the Gaza Strip towards Israel in the last 24 hours. Regarding the fighting inside the Gaza Strip, the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, there are local reports today of substantial IDF bombings in the areas of Beit Lahia. In the al-Shati refugee camp, the IDF reported that it completed its raid in the area. This operation was launched over a week ago. It included the entrance of ground forces, air, sea, and artillery bombardment, as the forces have moved to the new phase of fighting in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, while launching much more targeted raids based on intelligence. The IDF reported that throughout this raid, many gun battles were held with Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad operatives, and then many different terrorists were killed. Substantial intelligence was uncovered, rocket launchers were discovered and destroyed, and tunnel activity was also discovered and destroyed. In addition to this, it was reported today that Ahmed Gul, the commander of Hamas's al-Shati refugee camp battalion, was assassinated in an airstrike in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. Gul had participated in the attack on October 7th and was also one of the guards of the hostage that was taken, Noa Marziano, who was killed while she was in captivity. Regarding the central parts of the Gaza Strip, there were substantial bombings reported in the areas of Deir el-Balah. However, there was very little information regarding what was actually targeted. The bulk of the fighting remains in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. In Khan Yunis, there were substantial face-to-face gun battles reported throughout the day. IDF forces were reportedly advancing in various different parts of the region. Tunnel entrances were located and weapons caches were found. Substantial bombing was reported throughout the city. In addition, the major news coming out of Khan Yunis is that the IDF launched a major operation into the main hospital in the area, the al-Nasser hospital, following intelligence that suggested that bodies of kidnapped hostages were being held in the hospitals. Reportedly, the intelligence was drawn from freed hostages and captured Hamas operatives who stated that there were bodies and possibly even live hostages in the hospital. In this operation, dozens of Hamas operatives were arrested by the IDF, including several who also participated in the October 7th attack. Weaponry was found in and around the hospital as well. The IDF also published a recording from yesterday where an IDF coordinator of activity in the Palestinian territories spoke to the hospital administrator, giving him a 12-hour ultimatum to make Hamas cease all its military activity in the hospital before the IDF acts. It was also reported that the IDF estimates there may be a tunnel under the hospital and is still searching for it. After the operation began, the IDF announced that it found evidence that shows that the bodies of hostages were in fact held in the hospital, however that they were removed prior to the IDF operation. Reports coming from the hospital are that one patient was killed during the raid and several others were injured. The Palestinian Health Ministry also reported that the IDF was unearthing makeshift graves in the regions of the hospital, presumably looking for those hostages. Other news related to the Gaza Strip: there was a story published in the website Sinai Human Rights Group that was later picked up by the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and expanded upon. It states in eastern Sinai, near the Egyptian border with Gaza, Egypt has begun preparing a massive compound area that will be able to absorb Palestinians should they actually cross the border. Egypt is very fearful that Palestinians will flee from the southern town of Rafah into Egypt should the IDF invade. Egypt has said it is not going to let this happen. However, according to this report, it is already preparing for that eventuality. The Wall Street Journal reported this area, which is supposedly between 13 and 20 square kilometers, which is roughly 8 square miles, is being surrounded by large concrete walls that Egypt is developing in order to ensure that should Palestinians enter it, they will not actually be able to proceed all the way into Egypt and will still be held within a confined area. Amidst this, it was reported today that while Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is refusing to take calls from Netanyahu, this was reported already several months ago, Netanyahu's office has been trying to arrange a phone call between them. Al-Sisi is refusing. The two have not actually spoken since the war began. The head of the Mossad, Dedi Barnea, gave President al-Sisi a message from Netanyahu while he was in Cairo at the beginning of the week. It was not reported what that message was. Likely it relates to Israel's impending invasion of Rafah. However, at this point it is not reported. We can only speculate that it relates to the ongoing fighting and how it is going to affect the relations between Israel and Egypt. Regarding casualties, 2 IDF soldiers were reported killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. The total number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began is now 235. 9 IDF soldiers reported injured in the last 24 hours. Total number of IDF soldiers injured in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began is 1,361. The Palestinian Health Ministry is reporting that 87 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of Palestinians killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 28,663. 68,395 Palestinians were reported injured in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, and there are still several thousand who are buried under the rubble and presumed dead. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, the head of UNRWA, Philip Lazzarini, stated today that he does not think that UNRWA will be able to continue functioning if the IDF invades Rafah. This relates to the fact that the vast majority of humanitarian activity in the Gaza Strip is currently coordinated out of Rafah. It was coordinated out of the southern parts of the Gaza Strip from Rafah and Khan Yunis. However, since the IDF invaded Khan Yunis, it is now mostly coordinated out of Rafah. In addition, he added that if the suspended funding that the organization was receiving is not restored, UNRWA's cash flow will start to turn negative in the coming weeks. This relates to the suspending of funding that many countries ordered after the expose that several different UNRWA employees participated in the October 7th attack. UNRWA initially stated that it is going to run out of funding at the end of February. It is currently February 15th. Presumably that is what the head of UNRWA is referring to. Several of these countries, I will remind everyone, have stated that UNRWA has to undergo substantial reforms before they restore the funding. Specifically, the United States and the United Kingdom have both indicated that they would to some extent like to restore the funding, however, that they still need either proof from UNRWA that it is doing all it can to make sure that its employees do not support Hamas, Hamas are not members of Hamas, or that UNRWA has to go some measure of reform before this funding is restored. Other news related to the humanitarian situation: responding to the al-Nasser hospital operation, the IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari gave a rare English statement in which he stated, among other things, that one of the missions of the military is to ensure that the hospital continues its important function in treating patients, adding that the IDF made clear that patients and medical staff do not need to evacuate from the hospital. The military also added that it is sending oxygen tanks and fuel as the hospital requests. Again, what Daniel Hagari is trying to state is that the IDF is actually trying to preserve the hospital to be only for treating patients and to make sure that there's no Hamas activity in the area. Related to this, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres condemned the IDF operation in the al-Nasser hospital, stating that no military activity should take place in hospitals, i.e. he's also saying this towards Hamas and the IDF. However, statements were specifically relating to the IDF. Regarding the entrance of aid trucks, the Gazan Border Patrol announced today that 134 aid trucks entered the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. These include trucks carrying food, water, shelters, medical supplies, and cooking gas. According to the report, 130 of these entered through the Kerem Shalom crossing, and 4 trucks carrying cooking gas entered through the border of Rafah, the border with Egypt. It is noteworthy that that is substantially less than has been entering, at least when the amount of trucks were being reported every day. Today it was reported 130. We don't have accurate reports from the entrance of aid trucks in the last 2 to 3 weeks, ever since the protests in Israel started against the entrance of these trucks. Moving on to the West Bank, there was substantial IDF activity reported in several different areas in the West Bank. In the Baitunia village, 6 weapons labs were located by the IDF and destroyed. In the areas of Ramallah, the IDF entered in order to carry out different searches, so there were reportedly a lot of confrontations that erupted and several Palestinians were injured. In the Ilar village, weapons and terror-related monies were confiscated by the IDF and several people arrested. And in Nablus, a primed explosive device was found amidst other devices that were also located and dismantled. A total of 22 Palestinians are reported arrested throughout the West Bank in the last 24 hours. Other news related to the West Bank: in addition to the ongoing investigations that the U.S. is carrying out regarding Israel's activity in the Gaza Strip, it was reported today that the United States has launched 2 independent investigations about 2 incidents in which 17-year-old Palestinian-American citizens were killed by IDF forces in the West Bank. This is relatively unusual. Usually what happens when a U.S. citizen is killed by IDF forces is the United States issues a question to Israel what happened and says it relies on Israel to carry out its own investigation. However, amidst the different condemnations of Israel that is not actually trying to rein in violent activity in the West Bank, it seems the United States is adding these investigations to the other investigations that have been reported in the last several days about the IDF activity. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon, there were continued substantial escalations in the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. Hezbollah launched over 37 rockets and missiles towards the northern parts of Israel in the last 24 hours. These included substantial barrages to the areas of Kiryat Shmona, causing damage to infrastructure, other barrages towards Kfar Giladi, Tel Chai. The electrical grid was knocked out in the areas of Margaliot. Early in the day, there were also rockets sent towards the areas of Zar'it in the Upper Galilee and Shomran Arab al-Ramsha in the Western Galilee. Regarding IDF activity, the IDF reported that warplanes carried out a series of attacks against Hezbollah military structures in the areas of Kanetra, Yarin, and Ataibe. Early in the day, it was reported that the IDF targeted Hezbollah infrastructure in the areas of Alavona and military structures in Blida village and Maruna Ras. Attacks were also reported against launching sites and Hezbollah infrastructure and compounds in the areas of Wadi Saluki. Al-Miadin reported that the IDF carried out artillery fire in the areas of Al-Avona, and Al-Akhbar also reported that drone attacks were used against a car in the Blida village, and other attacks were also carried out in Anabatia. Other news: it was reported today that Ali Muhammad Adabas, who is the central commander of Hezbollah's Radwan force, was assassinated, along with his deputy Hassan Ibrahim Isa, another Radwan operative. So I remind everyone that the Radwan force is Hezbollah's commando units, that is equivalent to Hamas's Nukhba force that carried out the attacks on October 7th. According to reports, this assassination was carried out in the substantial Anabatia attack that was reported yesterday, in which Al-Miadin reported that a total of 8 people were killed in a drone attack against a 3-story structure. Al-Ahbar reported that there may be people still trapped under the rubble of this attack. Hezbollah announced that Adabas was in fact killed and that he was in charge of the Palestine front within the organization. However, Hezbollah claims that he was not killed in that Anabatia attack, however that he was killed 6 days ago. In the various rounds of IDF retaliations yesterday, Hezbollah announced that a total of 7 of its operatives were killed, bringing the total number of Hezbollah operatives that the organization says were killed since the war began to 203. Moving on to some of the regional developments, NBC reported today that the U.S. carried out a cyber attack against an Iranian spy ship last week, that the spy ship was collecting information and transferring it to the Houthis in Yemen. This relates to reports that were issued already several months ago that the Houthis do not actually have the intelligence capabilities to continuously be targeting ships the way they are, and likely it is Iranian spy ships that are actually collecting the information and transmitting it to the Houthis. Other news, the U.S. Central Command reported today that 4 attacks were carried out in Yemen in the last 24 hours, targeting 7 nautical cruise missiles, 3 attack drones and explosives, all that were ready to launch towards ships in and around the Red Sea. It was also announced that advanced conventional and lethal weaponry was located on a ship that was intercepted from Iran that was headed towards the Houthis back on January 28th. Other news, the Houthi leader, Abdel Malik Badr ad-Din Houthi, stated again today that the movement will continue their actions targeting Israeli ships that are bound for Israel, US and UK ships, all within the Red and Arabian Sea, until Israel stops its crimes in the Gaza Strip. Moving on to some of the political and general trends for the last 24 hours, there were ongoing protests in Israel today of the family members of different hostages. Some of these handcuffed themselves and barricaded themselves in front of the IDF's main headquarters in Tel Aviv, where the government was reportedly holding a meeting. Other news, Martin Griffiths, who is the UN Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, was giving an interview to Sky News today. He was asked in that interview about Israel's intentions to destroy Hamas and specifically to destroy the terrorist group's governing capabilities. He responded by stating that Hamas is not a terrorist group for us, as you know. It is a political movement. He then added, but I think it will be very difficult to dislodge these groups without a negotiating solution, which includes their aspirations. This, of course, was widely condemned by Israel, stating that the UN is again showing that it does not actually want to fight terrorism. Other political news, in an interview given today to Al-Sharq al-Awsat, Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas was asked about the possibility of Hamas joining the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO. He repeated the statement of the PLO and the position that has been held by the PLO for decades already. He stated that any movement is welcome to join if they pledge to adhere to the political platform of the Palestine Liberation Organization and to ratify previously signed agreements. This relates to a decades-long disagreement between Fatah, the main faction of the PLO, and Hamas. Hamas has over the years offered and tried to join the PLO, however they have refused to accept the previously signed agreements of the PLO with Israel. Abbas is stating that the position has not changed. If Hamas wants to join the main movement within the Palestinian organization, the Palestine Liberation Organization, it needs to accept the political platform of that organization and to accept the previously signed agreements. Other news, President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke on the phone today for 40 minutes. This is the second time they spoke this week. The White House put out a statement stating that the two discussed the hostage situation, and President Biden expressed his opinion about the appalling conditions the hostages are kept in for the last 132 days, the need to increase humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, and that President Biden repeated that a military operation in Rafah should not take place until a credible and executable plan to ensure civilian safety is developed. Relating to this, Wall Street Journal published earlier in the day an article about the Netanyahu-Biden relationship. The article stated that while the two have spoken 18 times since the war began, their relationship reached a boiling point at the end of December, when Biden was insistent that Israel move to the next phase of the war. He reportedly was close to screaming on the phone with Netanyahu, declared that the conversation between them was over, and slammed the phone down. According to the report, the administration has devised a package of moves aimed to pressure Prime Minister Netanyahu. Chief among them are reversing several Trump-era policies. These include allowing products in the settlements to be sold as made in Israel. Biden administration is considering reversing this, making sure that they're marked as made in the territories. Another one is reversing the statement that former President Trump gave that settlements do not violate international law. In addition, it was reported that the U.S. administration is considering sanctions against ministers in Israel, specifically Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. However, they decided not to pursue these at this time. The report adds that the relationship is again nearing boiling point over the situation in Rafah. Moving on to the future of the Gaza Strip, and somewhat relating to this, the Washington Post reported today that the United States and several other Middle Eastern countries, including Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, as well as Palestinian delegates, are trying to complete detailed plans for an all-out peace initiative that will lay down a timetabled roadmap for a Palestinian state. According to reports, they want to announce the completion of this roadmap in the coming weeks. Since it is associated with the ongoing hostage negotiations, possibly the intent is to declare this roadmap during the 6-week truce that was supposed to happen in the first phase of the deal. Relating to this report, there was wide-range condemnation within Israel, including from Likud members and different secular leaders. Israel's Minister of National Security and head of Jewish Power Party, Itamar Ben-Gvir, put out a tweet stating, 1,400 murdered and the world wants to give them a state, it won't happen. And the head of the Religious Zionism Party, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, stated, and I quote, the message is that it's really worthwhile to slaughter Israelis. Smotrich later demanded that the Israeli cabinet meet and stated that he expects Netanyahu to publicly reject this plan of the United States. The cabinet did in fact convene tonight, and after that meeting, Prime Minister Netanyahu, who had just spoken to President Biden, stated, and I quote, Israel categorically rejects international dictations imposing a Palestinian state upon Israel. Such an arrangement will only be reached through direct negotiations between the sides without prior conditions. Israel will continue to object to unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state. Such a recognition following the October 7th massacre will be a huge reward for terrorism. So what we're seeing is that report in the Wall Street Journal that the relationship between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu may be coming to another boiling point may also be about the future developments of a Palestinian state, or what is constantly being pressured by the U.S. administration against the Israeli government for Israel to come up with a day-after plan for what is going to be in the Gaza Strip. If you enjoy these reports, please do remember to subscribe, give a like, turn on notifications. If you think anyone else will benefit from them, please send them along. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. That is my report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.